In this project I'm going to turn this quite dull square arch into a beautiful Moroccan arch, as inspired by our trip to Marrakesh in the summer. So I start by tracing out the perimeter of the current arch on my plywood. Having done that, I draw the Moroccan arch as I would like it to be, but you'll see that I only draw it on one side of my template, because what I will do is cut down the middle, flip it over and use it to get a symmetrical arch on the other side. So I took quite a lot of time at this stage so that I got the arch just the way I wanted to, and a second opinion is always useful at this stage. You want to get a nice smooth curve so that it's got a nice flow to it. I now cut out my arch with my jigsaw, and I usually do my cutting outside because of the dust. Rather annoyingly, it started to rain today, so I had to keep running inside because you don't want to be using power tools in the rain. So having cut out one side, I then just flip it over and cut out the other side. And here I'm cutting the top edge of the arch so that it will fit nice and snug into the slightly curved arch that's currently between my kitchen and what we call the music room. So just checking it for size before I then, well, rinse and repeat, I suppose. So yeah, you know what to do. Having cut out both of my plywood arches, I'm now tracing the shape onto a piece of plasterboard so that I can attach plasterboard to the front. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to plaster my finished arch, and you can't plaster plywood. This is just an old piece of plasterboard I had, so you can see it's actually broken down the middle, but that won't matter once it's been plastered. So I'm using a craft knife to cut it out. Straight edges, in case you've never cut plasterboard, are quite easy. You break the paper on the top, fold, and then cut through the paper at the bottom. It's a bit trickier to cut curves into plasterboard, and you just have to keep cutting. You just keep cutting and keep cutting and keep cutting until you've cut all the way through, which is why at this stage I decide I need to have a board underneath so I don't damage my painstakingly made mosaic floor, which you can probably see there underneath me. I do all sorts of crafts, and I used to make mosaic for a living many moons ago. So it's a very dusty bit of the job, this, but there's really no avoiding it, and it takes a long time, and I've left all the cutting in so that you can see just how long it does actually take to cut all the way through. But it's possible, just persevere, and it will in the end pop out, and hopefully that moment is coming up soon. And there it is. Hooray, all done. So I just check it for size. Oh, and I cut the top off, yes, that was quite easy to trim. And then I do the same again for the other board. For the other side of the arch, I'm doing a stepped rebate. It will add a nice bit of detail, but it will also avoid the necessity of plastering the entire wall on the music room side. On the kitchen side, the section of the wall has a natural break in it, which means the plastering wasn't a big job. on the other side of the wall, on the music room side, it was quite a big wall, and there's also a radiator on the wall, which would have been very disruptive. I didn't want to risk plastering up to the edge and then stopping, because I just knew it would start to crack. So putting a stepped rebate in there will mean the arch can be plastered and it will find its natural edge at the step of the rebate. And I will then finish the rebate with some polyfiller to smooth it off. And there's the second arch. With the pieces that I was just explaining about. So hopefully you can see a bit better there what I was describing. There's a stepped rebate on that side of the arch, which I think you'll agree looks quite smart. I'm now fixing the plasterboard to the plywood. This is so that I can offer it up and it will be its true depth, so that I can mark the wall for the battens. So here you see me pre-drilling my battens using a wood bit. I can then change my bit to a masonry bit and drill straight through those holes. And then what I do is I put the raw plug on the end of the screw and hammer them all the way through, and then finish off by driving them home. It's quite efficient, and you always get the holes in the right place, which helps. I did very carefully measure where I wanted these battens. I needed the arch with the plasterboard about 5mm, 4mm in, so that it could be skimmed and then top coated with plaster, and it would then end up at the right, in the right position. I had to come in a little bit further on the music room side because of the rebate, but also because I used a slightly thicker plasterboard. It was just what I had around, and some was 9mm and some was 12mm. So yeah, I had to be careful of that. I used quite a lot of fixings to secure the arch. So this arch is not going to go anywhere once it's in place. It will probably be the last thing standing in my home come Armageddon. And here you see me putting some noggins in place, some cross battens. And this will be to attach my hardboard to the underside of the curve. I am going to tile the underside of the curve, which means I can use wood. I don't need to use plasterboard. And partly I've done that because I want to use Moroccan tiles on the underside of the curve, because I think it will be a beautiful feature. But it also means I didn't have to go out and buy a sheet of special curvable plasterboard. I'd have had to get an 8x4 sheet, and that would have been really annoying. But it suited my design purposes anyway to just use plywood, not plywood, hardboard. So I put the hardboard in place and then trimmed it for the first side of the curve. For the other side of the curve, I trimmed it before I put it up there because it was a bit faffy doing that. But sometimes it's the best thing to do because, well, things aren't always straight. You know, old houses aren't straight. The arch, definitely, the original arch, the wall was a bit wonky. So sometimes trimming when it's in place is the right thing to do. So now I do the same on the other side, and I hope you can see that I'm using ever such a lot of screws. The more screws I put in place, the smoother the curve will become on that piece of hardboard. And I also have those battens, which means I can put screws along the middle of the curve. I don't want it to sort of pop, because if I put tiles on it, the weight could pull it down. Not a lot, but if with tiles on it you don't want any movement, because tile cement is a bit brittle. But hopefully you can see that I haven't spared the fixings. I'm just trimming the hardboard at the bottom now. These sort of heels of the arch were probably the most wonky bit or uneven bit, but I didn't get too anal about that. So now the exciting moment when we put the plasterboard in place. And I was really happy with the positioning, because it was just about 3 or 4 mil set back from the rest of the wall. So you want to put these plasterboard screws in so that they sink below the surface of the plasterboard, so that they're not going to displace the plaster when it's put up there. So doing the other side now. A helper is always useful at moments like this. Many is the time I have attempted to do a project which really needed another pair of hands, but I'm so impatient. I try and do things myself, and yeah, often run into all sorts of mischief. So now the rebate detail is going up. So we spent a bit of time making sure they were positioned correctly. And there it is. One beautiful arch. I'm now going to finish off the sort of stepped rebate with some decorator's cork in one of these tubes. Sometimes the old-fashioned ways. Yeah, I think that's going to be better. And I'm getting a nice smooth. But what I'm going to do is pump it all full of cork and then do it in one go. This is the biggest gap. The gaps ended up a little uneven on either side of the arch. Not massively uneven, but so it's going to be quite cork heavy filling this side. I really hope I have enough cork, because that would be annoying, wouldn't it? We'll see. Yes, very nice. Now just deposit the excess there. Now this bit needs a bit more in. I think the key is to be able to do it in one go. Yeah, just finishes it off. So I'm happy enough with that. The thing about cork or silicone or filling is you can keep going over it and over it and over it, and you can end up sort of spoiling what you've done and getting a worse result. And sometimes it's best to know when to walk away. So I'd say that's pretty much how I'd like it. Now this is a very dark room, and the light in this room, the natural daylight, well, there isn't any natural daylight in this room, and what happens is the light comes from the kitchen through there. So this is actually going to always be in shadow, which will cover a multitude of sins. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now this whole inside is going to be tiled with Moroccan style tiles when I have made them. But I'd say that's my arch finished now. And once that's all painted up, I think that's going to look just fine. And with that stepped rebate, it's meant that the plasterer didn't have to plaster the whole of this wall, which has got a radiator on it, which would have been such a massive job. And that was the thinking behind doing it this way. And I'm happy. I think it's worked well and actually has given the arch an extra feature. So yeah, pleased with that. So here is the finished Moroccan arch, and it frames the room behind beautifully. I'm really happy with it. So I hope that's given you some inspiration and that you found this video helpful.